And we're live.
Good afternoon and welcome to Ask Me Anything in the broadband community. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and I am here with Matt Schmit, who is the director of the Illinois Office of Broadband. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Drew. Great to be with you.
Well, for some of the social promotion ahead of this, I kindly, jokingly said, "Oh yeah, like Illinois State Broadband Director 1.0 talks to Illinois State Broadband Director 2.0." As many of you know, I worked in Illinois from 2010 to 2013 as the State Broadband Office. Obviously, it was a different structure, different era. That was funding through the Recovery Act, the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, ARA. And there was $350 million for something called the State Broadband Initiative. And that program funded every state and territory, so the 56 of us, to do broadband mapping and data, right? And then that data fed up to the Federal Communications Commission, which produced a broadband map by census block, right? Not address level. And this time it's different. It's very different because under the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, you all are the decision makers of where funds go, and you've got much more money. It was $7.2 billion that time, and it's $42.5 billion now. And you have a lot more tools in the tool belt, right? So we're going to certainly talk at length, I hope, about the state of Illinois broadband and the state of the Illinois Broadband Office. But first, I think it's worth getting to know you a little bit, Matt, and tell us just a little bit about how you got on the broadband journey yourself.
Yeah, well, Drew, it goes back quite a while. You know, I was a grad student back at the University of Minnesota. I had an opportunity to spend some time as a research assistant working on transportation and economic development and the intersection thereof, which really led me into broadband. And during that time, I was able to serve as an assistant director of a telecom forum. So you got into a lot of policy discussions about Connect America Fund and universal service. And so this is going back, a good 15 years now. And so, you learn a lot in that capacity. And then you mentioned it, the ARA era and that significant federal investment in broadband. At the time, 2010, 2011, I knew enough to be helpful. And so I had a chance to consult with some local communities and bring some of that ARA funding back home to extend, middle mile or last mile networks. And so it was a really great experience to, I think, blend that academic and theoretical kind of background with some hands-on learning. And then, of course, in 2012, I got the bright idea of knocking on 30,000 doors and running for office. And so became a member of the Minnesota State Senate for a term and was able to apply some of what I learned in that capacity. And so it goes back, a decade plus wearing different hats. And, I think the experience is really complemented, one another very well. And so here I am in Illinois trying to fill the large shoes that you set forth in your previous role.
Well, and again, I don't mean to make this partisan because this is truly a nonpartisan issue. The extent of interest in so-called red states is just as deep, if not deeper, than in so-called blue states. But it does worth mentioning that the governor that brought me to Illinois was Governor Pat Quinn, a Democrat. He was lieutenant governor until something happened to the governor, right, which shall remain nameless. And as governor, Pat Quinn really understood broadband from two angles. One was from the utility consumer angle. Yeah. He was actually started or was instrumental in the Chicago Utility Board, CUB, right? And so he saw that importance from the consumer side. And then as lieutenant governor, he had really pioneered a lot of rural activities. And as he did these rural activities in county after county of Illinois' 102 counties, he saw this is really important to get broadband. And so we had the support of a governor like Pat Quinn. And now with Governor Pritzker, you also have an incredibly important leader in the terms of the things that he's done. We could talk a bit about that now. I don't want to finish the Minnesota journey, but he was instrumental when he came to office in 2018 in bringing state funding to broadband. Isn't that correct, Matt?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I think, in both your experience in Illinois and mine, I mean, I think we've both been blessed with really strong governors who've led on broadband, playing off of federal investment to do more at the state level. And in the case of Illinois, that investment, that interest in broadband really did precede the pandemic and in all the funding that followed. And so, just rewinding the tape, and I'll make this segue for you here. I served a term in the Minnesota State Senate. We created the Minnesota Office of Broadband in 2013, and then a border-to-border broadband grant program in 2014, both around the first in the country in terms of what they were striving to do. That being said, there were some good best practices at the time, and a lot has taken root since then. Well, you fast forward in 2016, I was not reelected. I was retired, got back into consulting. And there was this great opportunity in Illinois a couple of years later when Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly invested $420 million in broadband. So when I was wearing the hat as a state senator in Minnesota, we were fighting for 20 million here, 20 million there. And then here you have a state like Illinois that invests at the time, which, was a significant amount in a matching grant program. That got my attention, and I guess the rest is history. But I think the lessons to be learned here, whether it's the federal funding opportunity from the ARA era or what's taking place right now with ARPA and the BEAD program, those two programs respectively. I think it's the states where you've got leadership, in the executive branch, and you've got alignment with what you're doing at the state level and ideally at the local and federal levels that's really going to produce a good outcome. And so, again, we're both blessed to, I think, serve in the capacities we have and under the administrations we have.
So one last point on the Minnesota experience. You mentioned border-to-border broadband, and I have heard of that, but could you just define that and maybe just some special focus on how Minnesota saw the importance of really fast connections, right? Not just regular broadband or even slightly better than normal broadband, but really good fiber type connections.
Yeah. And, I think this is a good example. I mean, in Minnesota, the conversation goes back, I think 2005, 2006, under a prior governor's administration. I think Governor Tim Pawlenty created the ultra high speed broadband task force. And so we're going to give some credit. You had folks from the public and private sectors engaged, the provider community engaged. And even though in Minnesota at the time they were playing off of federal definitions of broadband, with which a lot of states have done since then, the idea was that, okay, we are going to pair our goals to the ever-changing definition of broadband set forth by the Federal Communications Commission. And all the while, we're going to try to match a level of commitment and funding that's going to get us universal access. And so, in Minnesota's case, I think it absolutely took an infusion of federal funding, in the Capital Projects Fund and BEAD to get that accomplished. And of course, a work in progress. But I think you go back 15, 20 years now almost, the aspiration was set early. And it wasn't set, by a governor's administration necessarily or by the legislature, but by a task force that was representative of various aspects of the state and perspectives. And again, ultra high speed broadband. And so that task force effort, spanned 3 different administrations, and I think has been a really good service for the state of Minnesota in continuing to push the envelope, think big, be aspirational, and set those goals so that the state doesn't just achieve universal access, but is putting, all corners of the state in a position to compete in the 21st century economy. And so, all of those lessons, Drew, I was listening, I was applying them then, and then of course in my current role here in Illinois.
So what did I mean? This is and while Illinois was definitely on the forefront, you weren't the only state. There are other states that were investing pre-pandemic in this, and of this 420 million you just mentioned, how did Illinois allocate that? What was kind of the structure, and how did this kind of how has it been used from 2018 till last 5 years?
Yeah. So again, to kind of rewind the clock here, we're setting, upon 4 years here in Illinois. We opened the Office of Broadband in the fall of 2019. That's when I came on the scene. And we worked with a broadband advisory council here in Illinois that continues to be active. We engaged national stakeholders. We looked at other states that had their own matching grant programs, tried to identify those best practices, what has worked well. And time again, a lot of that kind of research and inquiry leads you back to the Minnesota model, which, I can only take a little bit of credit for because there were others involved in administering the program and putting it together and making sure that it worked. And so, in any event, the roots of Connect Illinois really go back a decade into those early activities in Minnesota and beyond. And so what we've done in Illinois in 2020, February of 2020, we launched the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program, a matching grant program very similar to Minnesota's and others that tried to leverage every dollar of public investment with at least $1 of non-state match to increase the impact around the state. And so, of course, February 2020, the next month, COVID hits and the world changes. And so that spring, we were able to continue to proceed with our Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program and carry forward the values that we have identified from other states and applied to our own program. You really want to value that local community voice. You want to make sure that there are local leaders that are prepared to be part of the broadband conversation. You want to leverage local funding wherever you can. You want to have an all hands on deck approach when it comes to the kinds of providers that are involved in your broadband grant program and the kind of technology that you're using. And so the one hand, you're looking forward and trying to identify solutions that are going to stand the test of time and serve your state and communities well. But you also are in the midst of a pandemic. And so you want to be able to identify fixes that will help communities in the short term. And so it's that balance that we were able to strike because of the flexibility with the broadband grant program. And again, I think the best practices that preceded it. And so you fast forward, we've been able to invest in subsequent rounds of Connect Illinois. And the thing that I think that has really served us well, couple things. At the same time we were putting together and administering the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program, we're investing in non-capital programming. And I can say more about this if you'd like, but the idea is not just talk about the importance of local involvement, but invest in it, input local leaders and communities and county boards or village councils, school boards, for instance, in a position to understand the issue and to affect positive change for their communities. And so over this 4-year period or so, while we've been standing up and administering the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program, we've worked with over 50 local communities, whether it's county governments, villages in Illinois, neighborhoods in Chicago, regional planning councils, you name it, to really talk about Broadband 101, identify local goals, and try to put the ball in motion so that those goals can become reality. And so right now you're seeing a confluence of significant state and federal funding with really the returns on that investment in community capacity building. And so that's why I'm really optimistic that Illinois is going to be able to seize this moment, much as they had a decade ago during the ARA era, in making the most of these federal funds.
So a lot of other states that have been on the forefront of broadband activity in their state broadband offices, including Virginia, Louisiana, North Carolina, and others, really used the American now we get, instead of ARA, we got ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds, which included Capital Projects Fund, and then the acronym I can never say, the SLRFA, the state and local funds. They leveraged a lot of those funds in getting their broadband programs going. Right now, you've referred again to these Connect Illinois rounds. How many rounds have you done? And what's the kind of framework for application? And then, if you don't mind adding on top of that question, the ARPA and capital projects funds.
Absolutely. So we're throwing a lot of jargon around here, but yeah, the ARPA funds, and within them, we've been able to tap two sources, the Capital Projects Fund. So for Illinois, that was approximately $250 million in formula-based funding. And then also the State Fiscal Recovery Fund, approximately another $50 million. And so we're currently in round 3 of the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program. It leverages a combination of state and federal dollars. $300 million from ARPA out of those 2 buckets, and then an additional $50 million in state funds. And Drew, I have to tell you, I mean, it's really positioning our office well, and also our stakeholders and providers well, to anticipate the pace of the BEAD funded round 4 of Connect Illinois. And so right now we've got over $1 billion, 170 applications in front of us in terms of grant requests that we're conducting merit review and mapping review, just to make sure that when we make announcements and turn that fund into a series of grant agreements and awards and investment in network expansion, that it does a couple of things. Obviously it fills in the map in a strategic way so that we're taking as many of those broadband serviceable locations off the map right now, but also it allows us to, I think, really create an environment where a lot of that local effort that we've invested in over the last several years becomes reality, and you see those goals, pan out. And so the pace that we've set for ourselves this year with round 3, quarterly windows, so that you keep applicants, providers, local communities engaged in submitting their applications. And then you also keep our merit review team and our mapping review team looking at how these pieces fit together, busy in a way that I think is going to be analogous to what lies ahead with the BEAD funding. But I can't say enough about how important the Capital Projects Fund has been, in particular for states like Illinois that might have invested state dollars into this endeavor, or other states that hadn't done that yet. These Capital Projects Fund are really laying the foundation for every state in the country to make best use of those BEAD dollars. And so that's where we're at right now. We're able to plan ahead, but we're also able to do a lot of investment and engagement right now.
So what are the requirements? What's a brief snapshot of the requirements to participate in the Connect Illinois? Again, you've done 3 rounds, and I assume you'll keep doing them. How will those dovetail with BEAD applications?
Yeah. And I'm jumping around a little bit here, but all these pieces fit together, and it also speaks to the fact that we're balancing a lot of different programs all at once. And so when you look at the sorts of values that we've established from the get-go with the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program, they have carried through with Capital Projects Fund and ARPA, and also extend into BEAD. It's the idea that you want an all-hands-on-deck approach, that we want to hear from all sorts of different kinds of providers, different kinds of technology, and also different kinds of applicants. And so if you've got a local government that's really engaged, that would like to spearhead a public-private partnership, for instance, or invest in publicly owned broadband, we have an opportunity for you to get in the game. Likewise, school districts that might have been able to leverage some funding, during the past several years to promote shorter-term fixes to serve student needs, can partner with our office to leverage Connect Illinois dollars to invest in longer-term solutions to their connectivity challenges. And so, that's the thing that I think really is helpful for our program and our state, is trying to get everybody engaged. And so this is a statewide undertaking where we've been intentional about making Connect Illinois available to communities across the state. Generally, we follow the maps. And so we have our Illinois broadband map. We've been collecting data on our own for the last 4 years. And I'll tell you, the federal mapping is getting a lot better. But that being said, we continue to rely upon our own mapping to direct resources. And where we're hearing from communities in areas where the maps say they're covered, we're able to look at other aspects of the digital divide, like affordability or the lack of devices or digital literacy know-how, and invest in those communities accordingly. And so just point of emphasis here, this is a statewide undertaking trying to understand and shine a light on different aspects of the digital divide, whether it's rural or metro or everywhere in between. And so I think that kind of approach that, again, we've been very intentional about, parlays very nicely into the approach that BEAD has taken: broadband equity, access, and deployment, and the separate digital equity funding that's going to come down the pike here in 2024. Again, it's, I like to use that 3-legged stool: access, adoption, utilization, making sure that you're thinking holistically about this. It's not just about extending networks, but it's what you do with the broadband once you have it, and making sure that folks know how to use it, when it's available.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yes, you're quite right that we've been talking through multiple acronyms and multiple programs, but it's good to explain. But we do have a really audience that wants to drill into these things. Let's talk about BEAD in particular, right? So again, you were actively doing a lot prior to the pandemic, prior to ARPA, prior to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which of course is what created the BEAD program in November of 2021, almost 2 years ago. And then there was the 6-month period where the NOFO, the Notice of Funds Availability, was produced. And then we've just 3 months ago, a little more 3 months ago, gone through the allocations. Now that the FCC maps have been produced and you've gotten your sum total of amount of BEAD funding, the next phase of this is this implementation, right? And there's these proposals, these initial proposals, and we've been hearing a lot about initial proposal volume 1 and initial proposal volume 2. Talk a little bit about some of the BEAD specific issues, Matt, and like what what BEAD has added, not just to the work and the workload of the Illinois Broadband Office, but how this Connect Illinois grant program will work with BEAD incorporated into it.
Yeah, I mean, I joke that I have a formal job with the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, running the Office of Broadband here in Illinois, but an informal job working for NTIA. And, it's a great problem to have because it really speaks to a couple of things. I think the level of intentionality that they have applied from square one in setting up the BEAD program and making sure that it works for states and that it's going to be truly a historic investment that's going to solve problems around the country. But yeah, to your point, there's absolutely a lot of process, a lot of preparation that goes into that. And so we've had a sidebar conversation that is increasingly taking center stage over the past year. It really revolves around planning for, preparing for the arrival of the BEAD funds and the digital equity funds. And so it goes back a year ago, because we're a lean operation, technically, as of just a week ago, 2 full-time employees at the Office of Broadband. That is growing exponentially. So I think we'll be up to 10 by the end of the calendar year. But we brought on a management consulting team that we are relying upon to help us, really have the NOFO down for the BEAD program and execute on the planning and the preparation. And so that led publicly to a very ambitious statewide listening tour last spring, where we hit every region of the state. So you might remember we've got 10 economic development regions in the state, and we had 54 stops in this listening tour, engaging with everyday Illinoisans about their experiences with the digital divide. And we've been increasingly engaged with our General Assembly, making sure that they're aware of and knowledgeable about this great opportunity in both our need and how best to use the resources that will be available to us. And then right now, exciting times. We've taken the learnings from that listening tour over the summer that tended to be more qualitative in nature and pair that with some deep analytics in understanding the extent to which our BEAD allocation is going to meet need and how we're able to pair other resources on top of that and create a dynamic environment so that, we can achieve the goals that we've set forth. So in August, we published our 5-year action plan. Continue to take feedback on that because I consider that to be a live document where we're always trying to perfect our approach. But just last week, we established the public comment period for initial proposal volumes 1 and 2. And so that 30-day window runs through October 31 here in Illinois. And we're very serious about collecting constructive public comments on our proposed approach, applying that to a submission for NTIA, and then hopefully, whether it's in December or January, starting that mapping challenge process, and then again, preparing over time for the arrival of those BEAD funds and what will be the launch of essentially round 4 of Connect Illinois, because the alignment between what we have been doing and what we plan to do with the BEAD funding is so tight.
Well, we've got lots and lots of questions in. We can still get more. So let's turn to some of these. This question here is about the role of the Illinois Broadband Advisory Council versus the Illinois Office of Broadband. And many states, of course, have these advisory councils. Certainly it's something that I remember us doing as well in Illinois. I don't know if this is the same one or a different one, but tell us a little bit about these councils and their roles and any structural or procedural recommendations you would have on implementing a broadband plan.
Yeah. And so the council, in my mind, has just been critical for us. I think it plays a variety of roles, but I think transparency, accountability, giving not only a cross-section of our administration and department leaders, as well as broadband service providers and other key stakeholders from different statewide organizations, a chance to get together at least once every quarter to talk about, at the early stages, our plans for the use of state funding and setting up an office and a matching grant program. But then as the pandemic set in and more federal funding became available, how we align those efforts with federal opportunities. And then at the same time, as we're standing up some of this non-capital programming, endeavoring in one external collaboration or another, that we've got a chance to communicate that. And not only to this group that's on the advisory council, but to the scores of others who follow and in many cases participate in that own public comment period, if you will, at the end of each meeting. And so I think the council in our case, it is advisory, it's in the title, it's really clear as it was established in statute, but I take it as a very serious element to what we're doing. Transparency, accountability, really telling the world what we're up to, what we're planning to do, and hopefully bringing folks along with us. As I compare the work that we're doing with the council to like the task forces in a previous life in Minnesota, those task forces were so important back then in just basically elevating the issue. What is the need in putting maybe a state administration or the legislature in a position to consider investing in broadband at the state level? I think the role of these sorts of councils or task forces has changed because, all right, post-pandemic, I think there's a near universal understanding that broadband is absolutely essential for every home and business that wants it, not to mention community anchor institutions and farms and other locations. But that also it's really important for us to identify best practices and apply them wherever we can. And so I think the nature of those conversations has changed. But here in Illinois, I really enjoy our Broadband Advisory Council. And again, it's a dynamic group of folks that can contribute a lot to the conversation.
Is it open to anyone, or is it how are the people picked for the?
Great question. It's established in statute, so it's pretty prescribed in terms of where the voices are coming from. We have been able to expand the council by 4 seats to bring in other perspectives on the broadband conversation, and the meetings are open to the public, and so it's something that I think is, again, it really gets at that transparency and accountability piece. If you're interested in this topic, it's posted on our website. We advertise it in our newsletter. You're welcome to check it out. And if you raise your hand and you want to make a comment or ask a question, you're welcome to do so.
Well, and we absolutely want to get, news and updates and information about every broadband meeting in the Illinois channel on broadband.io. So let's make sure we get those announcements in, and you feel free to post them now that you're in the broadband community here, Matt. I want to ask you a question about staffing, and you kind of addressed this, but I didn't pause to ask you this specifically. Could you speak about how you navigate the challenge around needing to have a lean team and the reality of this daunting workload? And it really is all over the map. I mean, there's states like Louisiana that have 3 full-time employees, and there's state like North Carolina that have 15. It doesn't necessarily appear to, mesh with the task or the money or whatever. So talk a little bit about the FTEs you have and how you are navigating the lean team approach.
Well, first of all, I kind of joke in passing that we have a lean team. I mean, that's changing fast. And so this week we're onboarding 4 new staff, and we'll be doing something similar in another month. And so in Illinois, we're going from 2 to 10 very quickly here this fall. But I think more important than how lean your staff might be or the number of FTEs is your alignment with the administration and other aspects of state government. And in Illinois, we've had a lot. I couldn't ask for anything more in terms of like the alignment between our office and the governor's office and the engagement that we see across the administration, one department or another, very interested in what we're doing, very willing to help and to align. And so we haven't had to break down those silos, so to speak. I think there's a real keen understanding that broadband does transcend departmental lines. It's something that, just like in our economy and in our life, that is the glue that brings so many otherwise disparate areas together. And so with that said, we've been blessed to be able to, I think, do what we've done. But we need more capacity. And so we are investing in grants management staff because, we're going to go from, the growth curve is pretty significant in terms of that $1 billion coming online in a relatively short amount of time in administering those grants. And then also with community engagement, that's something that you hear me talk, very passionate about, very committed to. We've been able to do a lot of community engagement more informally, through external collaborations. And so the University of Illinois system has been absolutely instrumental in what we're doing. We've stood up the Illinois Broadband Lab over the past 3 years, which is a collaboration between our Office of Broadband and the University of Illinois system. And through that, we've been able to make 6 hires over the years. And so I talk about technically a team of 2 here at the Office of Broadband.
Right. Yeah, you leverage that by working with others. So talk a bit about that. That's a useful lesson for other state leaders.
Yeah, and exactly. That's what I'm getting at here is that external collaboration is so key. And so however big your Office of Broadband is, I think you're going to get so much more out of it if you're working well with others. And so University of Illinois System, Extension Services, the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society is based in Illinois, close working relationships with local governments and in their associations. And that kind of external collaboration has just really, I think, helped us elevate the issue and leverage, personnel and staff and time and energy in a way that really has increased our game.
What has, let's just take one or two of them. What has the University of Illinois done, and the very interesting collaborations that have gone on there?
Yeah, so our Illinois Broadband Lab collaboration, we've got several staff over there, experts in mapping and data and outreach and engagement, communication. That's where our newsletter largely comes from, that goes out every 2 weeks. And then investing in a statewide digital navigator network. That's the recent thing that we've been able to quit talking about and start doing something about. And so we leveraged some funding from Federal Communications Commission to focus on affordable connectivity program outreach and awareness. And so we've established that digital navigator network. We've got at least one navigator in every one of the 10 regions of the state. 6 months from now, we hope to have 20 or 30 formal navigators working with peers in creating essentially a community of practice where you identify best practices and you're in alignment over state and federal funding, measuring outcomes. Again, on the digital equity piece, I mean, this is something that it's not a flash in the pan. You invest in it, you can narrow gaps, but unless you're committed to that long-term investment, those gaps could widen down the road. And so we want to put in place, structures and workflows and collaborations that will help us keep those gaps narrowed. And so, focus on digital literacy knowledge, cybersecurity awareness, making sure that we've got Illinoisans who are looking for computing devices, a path to getting them. Those are the sorts of things that this kind of outreach and engagement can really lead to.
Mm-hmm. We have a question here from Kate Brunk. How does the Connect Illinois program define a diverse workforce? In your initial proposal, volume 2 for BEAD funding, it lists women, people of color, veterans as categories that qualify, but will you accept broader definitions of diversity from BEAD applicants in Illinois? If so, what's your vision for that?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I think, not to speak in too general terms here, but it really is all hands on deck when it comes to the kinds of applicants that we want to work with, the kinds of providers that we're going to need to work with, technology that we'll rely upon. And also when it gets to the workforce, I mean, it's really good that we're talking about this now, because for state after state across the country, that workforce could be the limiting factor here. We want to make sure that we're doing right now what we can to inspire folks from all walks of life to take an interest in broadband, whether it's network expansion on the front end or leveraging the results of that investment for productive use, in the economy and in life. And so we've got some really interesting initiatives that are underway. Nothing formal or public yet, but we're really excited to be launching some of this work. And I think on the workforce development piece, there's a couple of things here. Again, I look at it on the front end. How are we able to align with other existing efforts in workforce development, whether it's at the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity and me working with several of my colleagues, or looking at leveraging relationships with the university, with our community and technical colleges, and getting right to high schools, identifying this as a really attractive area of work to get into, and kind of inspiring that interest as early as you can in a person's career. And if they're interested in making a career change, identifying this as an attractive change to migrate towards. So again, that's on the front end. I think then there's an equally important conversation about, all right, once you've got that broadband access universally around the state, how are we putting our communities and again, our education institutions writ large in a position to prepare the workforce to best leverage that universal connectivity?
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Tram Nguyen. When do you think that your subgrantees will receive their funding? Okay, so timing question. Let's talk about timeline.
Right, get the crystal ball here. So I mean, I think you just think about what kinds of next steps we have in our sequence here. All right, we got the public comment period for volume 1 and volume 2 of the initial proposal. Once that closes, essentially November 1, we submit to NTIA for approval. We open a mapping challenge process that will take a couple of months when you look at the feedback that you're going to get from participating nonprofits, local governments, providers, and then the rebuttal period, and then finalizing your map and locking it in. During this time, we expect volume 2 will be approved by NTIA. I think all of this stretches out into maybe April of 2024. And so at that stage in the game, if we're in a position where we launch a notice of funding opportunity for our statewide stakeholders and potential applicants, what we want to do is really apply some of the lessons that we've learned with the Connect Illinois program and those programs that preceded it, and try to move away from high stakes deadlines wherever you can. Try to establish a more conversational approach in working with your applicants and stakeholders, and pursuing multiple waves, so that your qualified applicants don't have just one crack at the apple, but that you can have multiple. And I think that puts providers of all kinds in the best possible position to bite off no less or more than they can chew in the BEAD funding. And so multiple waves in 2024, extending into 2025. So this brings us all to the question: when are these dollars going to be moving? We have 365 days to finalize our intended use of these BEAD funds. It's the final proposal. Right now, we're working on the initial proposal. That final proposal, you could guess, would be due around April of 2025, is when we submit to NTIA a very detailed sketch of where our dollars are going, to which applicants, and to which broadband serviceable location, so that we can ensure that at minimum, all unserved locations are covered through the use of our BEAD funding. Now, of course, we want to go beyond that. We want to cover underserved locations and as many community anchor institutions as we can. But the point is, spring of 2025 is when I think the first states in the country will be submitting their final proposals for NTIA. That gets approved, and then the dollars start moving.
So thank you. That was great, a very detailed answer. Bob Moore asks another question that might be germane. He says, are there any requirements to issue RFPs for additional bids to do some of the contracted work? So I'm going to assume this is for kind of the implementation of broadband type of work, and speak to the kind of the RFP process that the Connect Illinois program has used for its first 3 rounds, and how you do in what you've described as the round 4 or the BEAD round, right?
Yeah. And, before I dive into this question, which is a great one, just adding to that, the previous question, even though the dollars from BEAD aren't going to be moving until 2025, again, this is why the Capital Projects Fund and the ARPA investment is so important, because between now and then, we'll have $350 million getting out on the street, investing in network expansion in Illinois. And so we can plan, we can prepare, we can engage for the future. But in the here and now, we can make progress and make investments. And so just want to emphasize for folks who are looking for better connectivity around the state, it's happening now, and more of it is going to continue to happen in the years ahead. So with that proviso in place, the point about the RFP process, what we've done with Connect Illinois in the past is really open up the map of eligible areas for qualified applicants to essentially pick the areas that they would like to go to, come to us with their ideas, so their proposed project service areas, and demonstrate their ability to get the job done, as well as their numbers, essentially how much they're seeking in a grant funding, how much non-state match they can provide, how many locations they're going to cover, how many fiber miles, for instance, are going to connect towers or homes or businesses. So things will change a little bit when you get into BEAD, because of the basic assumption that that last BEAD dollar at minimum has to ensure that all unserved locations are covered. And so there's a possibility that we may introduce a very kind of explicit RFP process where preset project service areas are identified, and that we ask providers to bid, if you will, provide applications to those areas first before all others. What's established in our initial proposal right now, essentially, is an approach that would divide out the state into hex bins, essentially. So hexagons, so not census blocks, but also not like 366 broadband serviceable locations. So a collection of hex bins that would allow providers to basically pick one or several of them and include them in whole as part of an application for funding and use of BEAD funds. Before we jump into this, though, we are going to do a couple of things. One, listen very closely to what our providers and other potential applicants are telling us works well for them through this initial proposal public comment period that's happening right now. We think this hex bin model has a lot of promise, but we also want to make sure that we apply some common sense to these hex bins and maybe not cover both sides of a river, for instance, in one hex bin. And so there likely will be a request for information that precedes our BEAD process altogether in perhaps February of 2024, where we put together our map and the hex bins that cover the entire state, how many unserved and underserved locations within each one of them, and ask our applicant, pool essentially. So anybody who's interested in BEAD to comment on that. And in some cases, we may not abide solely to a hex bin. It might be a different kind of geography. But the whole point is here, we want to apply some common sense to how we're defining these proposed project service areas. And then as we get into the BEAD funding itself and the application process, elevating the hardest to serve areas first and making sure that in wave one of the BEAD funded Connect Illinois round 4, that we are making sure that every application that comes to us is covering as many unserved BSLs as possible. You don't want to make the mistake that we've seen happen elsewhere in the country where you save the hardest to serve areas until last. I think what you kind of want to flip the script on that, and you want to take on that challenge as soon as you can in the process so that you can start to plan for how far your dollars are going to go. And so long story to this intended approach. Great question. And that's our current thinking.
So Christian Caruso asks or notes that the FCC's benchmark of 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits up has remained unchanged since 2015, although recently the FCC has proposed changing that, upping that. Now, obviously, 25.3 is an important number because that's the definition of unserved, but there's a second definition of 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up as underserved. So could you just talk a little bit about what's the definition that Illinois has used for your Connect Illinois for broadband, and what is your thinking? Let's drill a little bit more into your thinking on this unserved, underserved question, because there's a lot of locations that don't meet that 100 by 20 threshold. And he's kind of like, I want to make sure I'm understanding. Are you saying like, go ahead and just go do those small pockets of 25.3 and ignore the 100 by 20, even though it may make sense to get them along the way? Talk a little bit about how you kind of manage that.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I mean, I think realistically you do it all at once because that's how network builds take place. And so, first of all, I can remember way back when the definition was 10 by 1 and we celebrated the movement to 25 by 3. I think even before the pandemic, but certainly here in now 2023, 25 by 3 is wildly insufficient. One user in a home doing what we're doing right now. Remote learning, work from home, telehealth, all of those applications and so many more require a much more ambitious definition of broadband. So we hope that changes. And for the states that have indexed their definition of broadband to the FCC's definition, I think we're all going to benefit. Certainly with the Capital Projects Fund and with BEAD, you see an expectation for something much greater than 25 by 3. And so, at minimum, 100 by 20 is what we're looking at in terms of setting the areas for eligible, use of funds in the state. That's been something that we've been serious about with the Connect Illinois program from day one, is as we deploy funds, we're not just looking at the worst of the worst, but we recognize that anything under 100 by 20 really is in need of better broadband too. And so as we move into BEAD, and certainly this is happening right now with Connect Illinois round 3, we're interested in blended projects that pair both unserved and underserved areas to get the job done right in any given geography. And I mean, there's a whole host of reasons for doing that: efficiencies, economies of scale. This is how you build out networks. So let's just be intentional about building out networks in a way that works well for our providers and for our state and the communities across the state. And so that's something that we're going to, maintain and move forward with in BEAD. Obviously, you've got to be very mindful of how far the dollars stretch, and we are obligated to cover every unserved location by the time the last BEAD dollar is spent. But we feel like if we're smart, we're able to cover hopefully all of our underserved locations as well as all of our unserved locations and as many as our community anchor institutions along the way as possible. And so that's a great point. It really isn't either or. In this day and age, you've really got to set your goals high, and you've got to make sure that folks have at minimum 100 by 20.
We have a question from Reg Weiser.
Yeah.
Would you consider enabling education of the service provider bidders on technologies to reduce the cost per subscriber? Do you have any thoughts on that, and maybe speak a little bit about the various costs of different technologies?
If I'm hearing the question right, I think this really, it rings true about affordability and the role in all of this. And so I think in the pandemic, in the years, since we've launched Connect Illinois, affordability is an increasingly large part of the conversation. And so there's probably different ways of getting that BEAD acronym right, but it just as easily could have been affordable deployment. And so that's something that we take really seriously. It's built into our scoring rubric for the use of BEAD funds, as it has been with Connect Illinois from day one, benchmarking against, FCC's, urban rates, and just having a keen understanding of, okay, if you have the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program subsidy, great. We hope that continues into the future. But if you don't, that we're making investments that will serve the communities in a way that make the broadband that's expanding across the state truly accessible to families in a way that is sustainable and not reliant upon a federally funded subsidy program.
What do you want to be the end result of the efforts that you're doing in Illinois, that the country is doing with BEAD? Like, what's success look like for you? How do you make sure that investments of this sort translate into real world connectivity improvements?
Yeah. I mean, this is really what it all boils down to, right? It's how you use broadband when you have it. And this is, we talk about that three-legged stool: access, adoption, and use. And the use question, I think, is going to be getting more and more attention as states approach universal access, and we stand up strong approaches to ensure affordability and adoption, that we're looking at the use cases and what our community is doing to best utilize the broadband. I mean, like, not to be dramatic here, but I mean, this is a game changer, right? I think you look at so many of the challenges that we're seeing in states around the country, in demographics, population changes. I think that making sure that all communities have access to cutting edge broadband connectivity that compete with any wired community or wireless community across the globe, in terms of economic offerings, community vitality, competitiveness, and that sense of connectivity with family, friends, and business opportunities, so critical. And so I look at a state like Illinois. It's an absolutely beautiful state, and there's so much happening in so many of our smaller communities across the state. And if you can ensure that there's universal broadband that's affordable, that's scalable, that's high performance, wow. I mean, I just think that you enable so much innovation and allow folks to live and work from where they want to. I think it has a cascade of benefits for our local schools, for community vitality. And so I could go on and on here. It takes me back to a day when I was, pitching for more broadband funding at the state level. But we're at the stage right now where the investments largely have been made, and now we're in a position, okay, let's make those investments at the state level in a smart way, and now reap the benefits in an intentional way.
So as I look back at, my time working in Illinois, the Partnership for Connected Illinois, Broadband Illinois, it was a wonderful experience, and I loved moving to the state and living in Springfield. And as I think about kind of the office and the team that we built, kind of similar to your ramping up from 2 to 10 people. I kind of think about three kind of areas. And just let's swap notes here a little bit and let the audience hear Matt. So we had this thing called E-teams, right? And we broke the state down into 12 category or 12 areas, regional geographies. Yep. And we literally had people in each E-team that were kind of responsible for like community meetings, and maybe there was an education function for this, but there was also kind of an engagement with the BTOP, the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program winners. And that was really a kind of an Illinois thing where Illinois kind of pushed that responsibility on us. You obviously have direct hands-on money that you'll be, giving out to subgrantees. So you'll have that even more. So that was one kind of group of people we had on the team. The other was our mapping team, right? And so we did our own maps. We built these maps. Obviously, things are different now with the way the broadband serviceable location fabric is rolling out. But you have mentioned maps is important, and I want to hear like how that kind of factors in right now. And then the third was this sort of like, lack of a better word, it was like adoption use. We actually got an FCC Lifeline pilot program. This was before broadband was part of Lifeline, right? In the 2010 to 2013 era. So that was kind of another kind of small group. And so we had these three kind of core functions. And I'd just be interested if you could drill back a little bit more into Like what does the team do, and how do you manage the team to really accomplish the goals that you've set and that the president of the United States and the governor of Illinois have set for you and for broadband in Illinois?
Well, so I mean, first of all, we joke about having a lean team formally at the Office of Broadband, but again, that's growing. And then these external collaborations, particularly with the University of Illinois system and our Illinois Broadband Lab collaboration, it's just been absolutely golden for us. And they manage me. I mean, so many of the folks that have been with us and joined us in one capacity or another are so connected to the work and expert in their own ways that they know what needs to be done next. And they do a really great job of following through on initiatives and making sure that we're positioned well on mapping and data or communications or program design, community engagement writ large, digital equity inclusion. And so again, right now, as we're managing more growth, I think the opportunity and the challenge is to not mess up what we have, because we truly have, I think, a great capacity beyond the Office of Broadband walls, so to speak. But that as we build this capacity, we're able to get into new areas and making sure that we're connecting those dots between broadband, digital equity, and public health and community health outcomes, for instance, and telehealth and how the world has changed in telehealth in the last few years. So making sure that we're identifying those opportunities and seizing them. In other areas, making sure that we're working as closely with our libraries and our schools, our community and technical colleges, and so many other aspects of our education infrastructure. Because again, it's that pipeline of talent into broadband and digital equity work, but also preparing folks to best utilize it on the back end. And so those are the sorts of things that I think have really served us well. You get into kind of the approach that you've taken, and we've been intentional about this the last few years too. The Broadband Ready program that we've stood up, it stands for Regional Engagement for Adoption and Digital Equity. It's our intentional way of kind of decentralizing our work and creating an infrastructure so that, we are working closely with each one of our regional education hubs across the state in the 10 economic development regions that the Department of Commerce recognizes. But that through that, we're creating ready teams that are, as best as possible, representative of the energy and the initiative that's taking place at the local level within those regions. And so if you've got a digital literacy program that's already working, or an informal digital navigation effort, if you've got a computing technology center, for instance, public access to broadband and computing devices, that we're able to identify those approaches and then learn what we can from them, scale them up, and replicate them through use of state funds, through the use of collaboration effort, or as our digital equity capacity dollars come to us in 2024 and the digital equity competitive dollars the year after, that right, we're as well positioned as possible to make good use of those dollars. Not $1 billion of funding, but I tell you, for digital equity outcomes of this kind, 40, 50, 80 million that Illinois could expect through these programs really can make a big difference.
Well, Nikki Amundi asks, what are your strategies for implementing and ensuring digital equity and broadband access across various socioeconomic groups in Illinois? Do you want to speak just a little bit more about the digital equity plan? Have you released your digital equity component?
We have not. We have not. And so basically a lot of work has gone into this. And I want to tell you, it is, a work in progress, because we haven't put it out for public comment yet. And we're going to take that public comment really seriously. But so our current thinking on digital equity really builds upon the experience that we've had in working with Chicago Connected, for instance, and in the City of Chicago's Digital Equity Council. Cook County has a similar effort underway, had a very exciting week this past week announcing their digital equity plan. So identifying those efforts within Illinois, and not just in Cook County or City of Chicago, but across the state. And so identifying what's already working, what sorts of ideas have been held up, and then also, what have we learned from our formal statewide listening tour, 54 stops in 10 regions over 3 months, and how that applies to the feedback that we get when we release the draft statewide digital equity plan in January of 2024. And so I'm really excited for that next step in our journey, because this is a conversation that is going to, I think, be very important to a lot of communities around the state that might not have been at the front row to get Connect Illinois grant dollars per se, but definitely have digital equity needs and have really great ideas for how to address those needs, shrink gaps. And so to put a finer point on this question, I think we really take seriously what the data is telling us. We apply the qualitative feedback as context, and contour, from the listening tour. And then we take to heart the feedback that we get, both formal and informal, as we enter public comment period and finalize our state digital equity plan. And so one thing I just want to mention is, we knew that there was going to be this gap here between, talking with, folks around the state about digital equity through our listening tour, seeing some great efforts in Chicago and other communities around the state scale up and then ramp down because of funding. And so we put out on the street this summer our Digital Equity Capacity Kickstarter program. And basically it invests in 4 different things. One is ACP outreach and awareness. Also, it'll invest in computing technology centers, so that physical space where internet and computing devices are available to the public, digital literacy, cybersecurity writ large, and then also feasibility planning for local governments or communities that want to be part of the BEAD conversation down the road. And we had $1 million just to see, all right, what's the community going to tell us? What's of interest? $8 million of requests came to us in just a matter of weeks. And so we're poised to make announcements on what that Digital Equity Capacity Kickstarter program will produce. We look to put some more funding behind that. And this is going to be the bridge to the arrival of those digital equity funds, likely in summer, fall of 2024. And so I'm going on and on here more than I have in the past.
No, that's fascinating. This is great. We should have more on this Digital Equity Kickstarter. Yeah. I mean, these are great points about ACP education, computing technology centers, cybersecurity, and that last point. Hey, and how you can get in on BEAD dollars too, right? Yeah.
So exactly. I mean, and so we recognize there's a gap here. We want to make sure that we're investing. We're warming up, I think, the atmosphere for folks to prepare for the arrival of those actual federal capacity grant dollars. And I think it's, hopefully we're in a position where we have $10 million or so annually to invest in digital equity, and hopefully a path for more of that down the road, because there's tremendous need, and it's exciting to see the stakeholders come forth with their ideas. And so maybe next time we talk, we'll have more to share.
Well, this question from Adam Puckett does capture some of the Illinois dimensions. The perennial question is, how do you balance the voices of the Chicago machine and downstate, which he says is pretty much everything west of O'Hare and south of Kankakee. We're all used to that. Like, where does Southern Illinois begin? How do you balance the urban overlooked with the rural unserved in your job as Illinois Broadband Officer?
Well, I mean, Drew, I could swing that back to you. And how did you do it so masterfully when you served in this role a decade ago? But, for us right now, it really is a matter of getting out and around the state. Just this week, spent time in, not only Springfield and Champaign-Urbana, but down to Alton and Metro East St. Louis, as far south as Carbondale, talking to stakeholders, hearing what they have to say. And so it's a big state. We want to get out and hear from folks. That's what our statewide listening tour was all about. Not just, get to every one of the 10 regions, but get deep into those regions and hear from folks. Yeah. And so I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation that we continue to invest in and elevate. And, look, I mean, the aspirations, the goals, the requirements of BEAD force every state to look at the statewide needs. And a lot of times those needs can be more rural in nature. But at the same time, as I'm seeing updates to the federal map, I'm seeing more and more broadband serviceable locations that are unserved or underserved in urban areas, including Chicago. And so just an emphasis, this is a statewide undertaking. And, I think it's bipartisan. It's one of those things that can bring folks together from all walks of life to identify goals and make them a reality. And so, this is the part of the conversation where I just gush over how great this job is and how optimistic I am that we're going to be able to solve a daunting public policy challenge, if not once and for all, at least in a way that's going to be convincing that we've made tremendous progress in getting universal access out across the state.
Two quick questions before our final question. I'll ask them both here. One is, this question is from Leslie, who says, are you considering alternative technologies like fixed wireless, and what context? So give you a chance to address that technology question. And the second, I'll go ahead and ask now, is about the extension program, the Agriculture Utilization Research Institute Board, and state ag leaders. Could you just say a word or two about the ag and the extension communities? Go ahead.
Well, I'll start with the second question. I mean, this is just so exciting to see the change in precision agriculture and in what connectivity on farms can mean. And, you know, what we've heard through our Accelerate program and our Broadband Breakthrough program that's designed specifically to engage agricultural-rich counties across the state and the ag producers and stakeholders accordingly is a desire for choice, for different technologies to make sure that you've got a wired connection to the farm, but that also when you're out in the farm in your equipment, that you're connected to the internet accordingly. And so it's so important that you look at this holistically. And that kind of brings me back to the technology question, the provider question. This is absolutely going to require an all hands on deck approach in Illinois. And I'll just tell you that, you know, you can set goals and you can try to achieve universal coverage, but you can't actually make it a reality unless we get all providers and technologies working in a complementary way. And I think that, you know, that's how it's going to pan out in Illinois. And so I hope, regardless of your provider type, I mean, obviously you got to be licensed spectrum here, but we want to work with you, help us fill in the map. And if you got any questions about what the BEAD process is going to look like, or how you as a provider of a certain technology can benefit from BEAD funds, I'd love to talk to you, because we've set our goals high here in Illinois, looking to the future, trying to get in an area once and do it right once and for all. And on the same token, it's going to take all hands on deck to achieve our goals and to make the most of this moment. So I could say more about that question, but I'm going to say what I just said a lot here in the coming months. Yeah. We're going to need to hear from everybody.
We have run out of time, so we have to go to our last question. And I'll preface this by saying, when I moved to Illinois, I found this small community called Lincoln's New Salem, right? And I thought, oh yeah, like it's one of those like George Washington slept here type thing. No, Lincoln's New Salem is literally where Abraham Lincoln became the person he is. And we ended up living in Petersburg, just a mile away from New Salem. So my final question for you, Matt, is, what would Abraham Lincoln do about broadband?
Oh, well, you know, I think, you know, you'd have some great debates, the Lincoln Douglas debates. You'd get around and you would talk about hearing from all segments of the population, what works for you and your community. And I think you put a proposal together that I'm thinking of a team of rivals here, that different walks of life, different technologies, different providers, different stakeholders, we all have something to gain from this. And so I think that that's the kind of approach that's going to work in Illinois. Let's talk about this opportunity, which we're doing. Let's identify ambitious goals, and then together, let's all make those goals a reality.
Well, before we thank our guest for spending this hour with us, we want to remind you that we've got 2 Ask Me Anything events coming up. 2 weeks from today, we will have William Davidson, Director of Strategic Initiatives at Next Era Infrastructure Solutions. So more on the energy broadband interface. And the week after, on October 27th, we'll have Jason Rudin, the founder of CLAB. That's been moved. It was going to be a previous date, but it's going to be now October 27th. So those 2 events coming up this month. Please join me in thanking our great guest, Matt Schmit of the Illinois Broadband Office. And we'll see you later.
Thanks.
Take care.